The world watches with bated breath as former President Donald Trump's recent pronouncements on Iran send a chill through the global community. His stark words paint a picture of simmering tensions, a powder keg on a razor's edge. The question on everyone's mind, is war on the horizon? To understand the current predicament, we must journey back to the Cold War, when a CIA-orchestrated coup toppled Iran's Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. This act fueled anti-Western sentiment that resonates today. The 1979 Islamic Revolution and the ensuing hostage crisis further poisoned relations. Decades of confrontations and sanctions have created a climate of mistrust and hostility. The early 21st century saw fears over Iran's nuclear program reach fever pitch. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, was signed in 2015, offering hope for a more stable Middle East. Iran agreed to stringent restrictions on its nuclear program in exchange for lifting economic sanctions. The deal was hailed as a triumph of diplomacy but had its critics, particularly in the US and Israel. Critics argued the deal did not go far enough in curtailing Iran's nuclear ambitions. They pointed to sunset clauses as evidence that the deal merely delayed the threat. Trump's election in 2016 cast a shadow over the JCPOA. In May 2018, Trump announced the US withdrawal from the deal, citing its failure to address Iran's missile program and support for terrorism. European allies condemned the move, arguing the deal was working. They warned that the withdrawal would isolate the US and increase the risk of conflict. The decision was driven by Trump's America First foreign policy, and a belief that the deal provided Iran with a financial windfall. After the US withdrawal, Iran initially abided by the JCPOA, hoping to maintain economic ties with Europe. However, as US sanctions bit harder, Iran began to scale back its commitments. Iran's actions were seen as a dangerous escalation, pushing the region closer to conflict. Trump approached the Iranian nuclear issue with characteristic swagger, aiming to squeeze Iran into submission. His strategy hinged on relentless economic sanctions and bellicose rhetoric. Critics argued this approach underestimated Iran's resolve and risked pushing the regime further towards confrontation. The Trump administration's maximum pressure policy aimed to force Iran to the negotiating table. Sanctions targeted Iran's economy, causing widespread hardship for ordinary Iranians. Critics argued the sanctions strengthened hardliners and undermined diplomatic prospects. The sanctions fueled anti-American sentiment and bolstered support for the regime. The escalating US-Iran tensions played out against a backdrop of global unease. European leaders who had worked to secure the JCPOA were aghast at Trump's unilateralism. Russia and China strengthened ties with Iran, viewing US pressure as a strategy to contain their influence. Iran maintained a posture of defiance, insisting its nuclear program was for peaceful purposes. However, its actions, such as developing ballistic missiles and supporting proxy groups, left the international community guessing. Was Iran genuinely committed to peace or biding its time to develop a nuclear weapon? Iran walked a diplomatic tightrope, balancing strength and defiance with avoiding war. The leadership grappled with responding to Trump's pressure without appearing weak. Iran's economy, already reeling from sanctions, could not afford further devastation. A war with the US would likely result in catastrophic loss of life and regional destabilization. Iran's response to Trump's threats was shaped by a long history of mistrust and animosity. The 1953 CIA coup and the 1979 Islamic Revolution fueled deep-seated mistrust of the US. The hostage crisis further deepened the chasm between the two countries. Iran viewed Trump's actions through the prism of decades of broken promises and foreign interference. A calculated gamble, the risks and rewards of resistance. Faced with this complex and challenging situation, Iran's leaders opted for a strategy of calculated resistance. Rather than capitulating to US demands, Iran chose to push back, albeit cautiously and strategically, in an effort to demonstrate its resolve, deter further US aggression, and create space for diplomatic engagement on its own terms. Iran's strategy involved a combination of diplomatic outreach, economic maneuvering, and military posturing. On the diplomatic front, Iran sought to shore up its ties with other world powers, particularly Russia and China, as a counterweight to U.S. pressure. Iran also engaged in indirect talks with the United States, using intermediaries such as Oman and Switzerland to explore the possibility of a negotiated settlement. Economically, Iran sought to mitigate the impact of U.S. sanctions by diversifying its trading partners, promoting domestic production, and seeking alternative financial channels to circumvent U.S. restrictions. While these efforts were only partially successful, they helped to keep the Iranian economy afloat and prevent a complete collapse. Militarily, Iran adopted a posture of deterrence, seeking to raise the costs of any potential U.S. military action. Iran conducted military exercises, showcased its missile capabilities, and harassed U.S. naval vessels in the Persian Gulf, sending a clear message that it would not hesitate to defend its interests, even if it meant risking a wider conflict. Section 1. A chorus of condemnation and concern. The international community reacted to Trump's pronouncements on Iran with a mixture of alarm and condemnation. Long accustomed to the former president's penchant for inflammatory rhetoric and unpredictable foreign policy maneuvers, world leaders nonetheless recognized the gravity of the situation and the potential for miscalculation on all sides. The specter of another war in the Middle East, a region still reeling from decades of conflict and instability, loomed large in the global consciousness. European allies, still smarting from Trump's unilateral withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal, were particularly vocal in their criticism. They argued that Trump's confrontational approach had only served to escalate tensions with Iran and undermine the prospects for a diplomatic solution. French President Emmanuel Macron, who had invested considerable political capital in trying to salvage the nuclear deal, warned that Trump's actions were pushing Iran to make the wrong choices. The United Nations Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, appealed for calm and restraint, urging all parties to avoid any actions that could further escalate the situation. He reiterated the UN's commitment to the Iran nuclear deal, which he described as a crucial achievement for nuclear non-proliferation and regional peace and security. He also called on the United States to lift its sanctions on Iran, arguing that they were having a devastating impact on the Iranian people and undermining the possibility of dialogue. The escalating tensions between the United States and Iran exposed the deep fault lines that run through the international system, dividing the world into competing camps and highlighting the challenges of forging a common response to global crises. The Trump administration's America First foreign policy, with its emphasis on unilateralism and its disdain for multilateral institutions, had alienated many traditional U.S. allies, creating space for other powers, such as Russia and China, to assert their influence on the world stage. Russia and China, both permanent members of the UN Security Council and with long-standing ties to Iran, emerged as vocal critics of the Trump administration's approach. They accused the United States of pursuing a policy of regime change in Iran and of seeking to undermine regional stability in order to advance its own geopolitical interests. They also condemned the U.S. sanctions on Iran, arguing that they were illegal and counterproductive. The escalating tensions between the United States and Iran also had significant implications for the Middle East. Iran's regional rivals, such as Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, welcomed Trump's hard line on Tehran, which they viewed as a necessary corrective to what they perceived as years of Iranian expansionism and aggression. However, other regional actors such as Iraq and Oman were caught in the middle, wary of getting drawn into a conflict between the United States and Iran. Section 3. The price of confrontation. Economic and political fallout. The escalating tensions between the United States and Iran sent shockwaves through the global economy, underscoring the interconnectedness of the modern world and the potential for regional conflicts to have far-reaching consequences. The price of oil, a key barometer of global economic health, surged on fears of a disruption to supplies from the Persian Gulf, a vital artery of global energy trade. The Trump administration's sanctions on Iran, which targeted its oil exports, its financial institutions, and its shipping industry, were designed to cripple the Iranian economy and force the regime to the negotiating table. However, the sanctions also had unintended consequences, disrupting global supply chains, driving up prices for consumers, and exacerbating economic hardship in Iran, which in turn fueled popular discontent and undermined the prospects for a negotiated settlement. Beyond the immediate economic fallout, the escalating tensions between the United States and Iran also had significant political ramifications. The crisis further eroded trust between the United States and its European allies, who were already at odds over a range of issues, from trade to climate change to NATO expansion. The crisis also emboldened Iran's hardliners, who argued that the United States could not be trusted, and that Iran needed to strengthen its defenses and reduce its dependence on the West. Section 1. The road ahead, between hope and uncertainty. As the world grapples with the implications of Trump's renewed threats against Iran, the future hangs precariously in the balance. The path ahead is shrouded in uncertainty, with two divergent scenarios emerging as distinct possibilities. One leading towards a fragile peace, the other towards a conflagration that could engulf the entire region. The first, and arguably more optimistic scenario, envisions a winding, yet ultimately successful, road to diplomacy. In this scenario, cooler heads prevail, and both the United States and Iran recognize the futility and catastrophic consequences of a military confrontation. Back-channel negotiations, facilitated by intermediaries such as Oman or Qatar, gain momentum, leading to a gradual de-escalation of tensions. A key element of this scenario involves the United States rejoining the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the landmark nuclear deal that Trump unilaterally abandoned in 2018. In exchange for Iran's verifiable compliance with the terms of the JCPOA, the United States agrees to lift its crippling economic sanctions, providing much-needed relief to the Iranian people and paving the way for a gradual normalization of relations. Section 2. The global stakes, a world held hostage. The alternative scenario, however, paints a far bleaker picture, one in which miscalculation, mistrust, and the weight of history conspire to push the United States and Iran towards the brink of war. In this perilous scenario, Trump's bellicose rhetoric and Iran's defiant posturing create a dangerous feedback loop, escalating tensions to the point of no return. A spark, perhaps a provocative incident in the Persian Gulf, or a miscalculation by either side, ignites the tinderbox. Iran, leveraging its asymmetric military capabilities, targets U.S. military assets and interests in the region, including oil tankers and military bases. The United States, compelled to respond forcefully to safeguard its interests and credibility, launches retaliatory strikes against Iranian military targets, plunging the region into a wider conflict. The consequences of such a conflict would be nothing short of catastrophic. The global economy, already reeling from the COVID-19 pandemic and supply chain disruptions, would be thrown into turmoil. Oil prices would skyrocket, triggering a global recession and exacerbating social unrest in many parts of the world. The humanitarian cost, both within the region and beyond, would be immeasurable. Section 1. The precipice of choice. As the world watches with bated breath, the fate of peace hangs precariously in the balance. The shadow of war, a specter that has haunted humanity since time immemorial, looms large over the horizon. The path ahead is fraught with peril, a treacherous tightrope walk between the siren song of diplomacy and the deafening drums of war. The choices made in the coming days, weeks, and months will determine not only the fate of the United States and Iran but also the future of the Middle East and indeed the entire world. The stakes, as we have seen, could not be higher. A military confrontation between the United States and Iran would be a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions, unleashing forces that could easily spiral out of control and engulf the entire region in a conflagration that would make the Syrian civil war pale in comparison. The human cost, both in terms of lives lost and livelihoods destroyed, would be immeasurable. Moreover, such a conflict would further destabilize an already volatile region, unleashing a torrent of unintended consequences that would reverberate for generations to come. Yet, amidst the storm clouds gathering on the horizon, there remains a glimmer of hope. The path of diplomacy, though fraught with obstacles and setbacks, is still open. Both the United States and Iran, despite their deep-seated mistrust and animosity, share a common interest in avoiding a catastrophic war. The international community, for its part, has a moral imperative to do everything in its power to facilitate dialogue, bridge divides, and create the conditions for a peaceful resolution to this dangerous standoff. The choice before us is stark, yet clear. We can choose the path of war, a path that leads only to destruction, suffering, and the unraveling of the international order. Or we can choose the path of diplomacy, a path that, while difficult and uncertain, offers the only hope for a future where peace and security prevail. The time for decision is now, and the world is watching.